In the heart of the Indian Ocean lies a red island, ancient, wounded and restless. Madagascar, the land where the soil blessed rust and the people bled truth. An island once rich with spirit, silenced by history, and now awakened by rebellion. Tonight, the drums of Africa echo from its shores. Soldiers in green have marched through the capital. The flag's power has changed hands. President Andry Rajoelina, once the darling of the West, is gone. The military stands tall, not as servants, but as masters. And the world once again pretends to be shocked. They call it a coup, but for many on this island, it's a revenge against decades of poverty, corruption, betrayal, and foreign control. The Sahel burned, Niger fell, Chad shocked, and now Madagascar joins the region, the same region that hums through Africans' bone. No more puppets, no more chains. But in every African uprising, there is a shadow shaped like Paris, because whenever Africa tries to stand, France has always been there to pull the strings. To understand this coup, you must travel back to 1896, when France invaded Madagascar and tore away its crown. They took the queen, burned the palace, and rewrote the laws in a foreign tongue. They call it civilization. But in truth, it was domestication of a proud people turned into servant of an empire. France left, but it never truly left. The banks, the mines, and the trade routes, even the language, all remained French. And when the Madagascar people tried to breathe on their own, debt became their new chain. For decades, the French France ruled the veins of this island. Now it is called the Areri, but the heartbeat behind it is still foreign. When France looked at Madagascar, it didn't see a nation, it saw resources. Nickel, cobalt, vanadium, oil. France factories need them. France cars depend on them. And so, power in Madagascar was never really decided by elections. It was decided by who France wanted smiling on the podium. So for years, the people of Madagascar have whispered in the dark, how long shall we suffer while the rich dine on our soil? In the streets of Antananarivo, markets overflow with hunger. Children carry empty bowls while ministers drive imported cars. Fishermen cast their nets, not for fish, but for hope. And in every corner of this island, the air is heavy, thick, and the smoke of frustration. The president, Andry Rajoelina, came to power promising rebirth. A young face, a man of the people, they said, but behind the smile stood the same old structure. French advisors, Western investors, science deals. They said he was the chosen one. And yes, he was chosen, but not by the Madagascar people. Chosen by those who see Africa not as a continent, but as a construct. The mines of Ambadosvi, one of the largest nickel and cobalt mines in the world, remains under the gaze of Western cooperation. The Madagascar workers earn pennies while foreign companies take billions. And so, the seeds of anger grew. Every broken promise was drop of fuel. Every hungry child, another spark, until the people looked to the army and said, if our leaders won't protect us, maybe our soldiers will. And when soldiers begin to listen to the cries of the people instead of orders of the palace, change becomes inevitable. The whisper became a memo, the memo became a roar, and the roar shook the capital. It began quietly, first in the barracks, young officers speaking in code, questioning why their salaries were late, why their nation's riches were guarded by foreigners. Colonel Michael Rajoelina, the man who would lead the coup, once served under Rajoelina's command. He saw the corruption up close. He watched his country burn to Paris while 8 people starved. To the world, he is a rebel. To many in Madagascar, he is a voice of justice. And on one dawn, without warning, tanks rolled out of the shadow. The palace was silenced. Soldiers stood with no fear, only purpose. This is not a coup, he said, standing before cameras. This is a correction. But correction in Africa always bled, because the moment an African soldier takes power, the West call it instability. Yet when the West found oppressions, they call it democracy. Now the world watches, but the Madagascar people are no longer watching. They are participating because this is the time to fight, not about politics, it is about dignity. And as the dust of the coup settles, a new question bends through the island. Was this the beginning of freedom or the start of another cycle of control? For somewhere across the ocean, in the golden horse of Paris, the old empire stares. France watches, France worries, because Madagascar, the island it once called 8 jewels, has now slipped from 8 group. They call him TGV, Train Agaride. The fast train because Andry Rajoelina moved faster than anyone expected. A young DJ from the heart of Antananarivo, he rose from music decks to the highest office of the land. His rhythms changed from beat to ballad, from parties to politics. In 2009, he was just 34 years old, bold, loud, and hungry for power. The youth adore him, the West admire him, and France smiled because Rajoelina spoke their language, wore their suits, and signed their deals. He was the perfect bridge between African soil and Europe's hand. That year, backed by whisper from Paris and local elites, he led his first coup, ousting President Andry Rajoelina, claiming it was for the people. The African Union condemned him, but France stayed silent. Silence in politics is never neutral. It's approval in disguise. Rajoelina ruled a broken nation, promising light but delivering shadows. Under his watch, corruption deepened. Foreign companies expanded their claws into Madagascar veins, from mining to energy, from port to land. And when he was finally forced out, he waited for the night storm. That storm came in 2018. He returned, older, smoother, and with deepened ties to Paris. The election were wrapped in wealth and whispers. France and a handful of Western investors quietly supported his comeback. And once again, the Red Island bowed, but this time always reveals the truth. Behind the smiling photo ops, the nation was drowning. 80% of the population lived in poverty. The roads decayed, hospitals empty. Meanwhile, his allies built mansions and foreign accounts. France companies thrived, the Madagascar people barely survived, and soldiers watched in silence, watched as the brothers starved while politicians drank important champagne, watching as the flag became decoration instead of symbols, watching until watching was no longer enough. And came 2025. The whisper in the barracks grew into meeting. The meeting became oaths, and the oaths became actions. On an early October morning, armored trucks rolled through the city. The presidential palace surrounded, the media seized, the capital frozen in silence. Rajoelina, once the man who used the army to rise, was now brought down by the same army. History in Madagascar repeats itself like thunder, never gentle, always loud. As the coup leader, Colonel Michael Andry Rajoelina, announced the takeover, one truth echoed through the island. The man who once danced to the rhythm of power had now fallen to the rhythm of justice. Rajoelina's fall was not sudden, it was slow, predictable, inevitable, because when leaders forget the sound of their people's cries, those cries become gunfire. As now the island stands at a crossroad, the people cheer, the army claims peace, but somewhere across the ocean, in the blue rooms of Ancient Palace, France plots its next move. Because one thing is certain, France has never let go of Madagascar willingly. France call it France Afrique, a sweet name for a bitter system. The invisible empire, born not of flags and guns, but of contracts and currency. In West Africa, the use of CFA, France, to keep nations chained. In Madagascar, they use something deeper, dependency. They trained the elites, they funded the politicians, they controlled the flow of money and minerals. And when a Madagascar president dared to look east, towards China, towards Russia, towards freedom, France smiled politely and waited to remind him who truly owned the key. You see, France never left Africa, it simply changed its uniform, from soldiers to banker, from colonizers to partner. The mines of Ambatovi controlled by foreign corporations, the oil reserve under France contracts, the trade routes monitored by Western companies. Even the country's most valuable export, vanilla, moves through French brokers. Every deal signed in Antananarivo echoes in Paris. Every Madagascar loan approved by Western banks. Every promise of development filtered through foreign hands. And so, when this coup erupted, France did not panic. It hesitated. It waited to see whether its new power would serve or resist. Because French understand one thing well: empires never die, they adapt. In Paris, diplomats spoke in cycles. We are monitoring the situation, they said. But behind the curtain, calls were made. Companies demanded assurance for their assets. Generals demanded loyalty. Aid agencies pushed their funds. France knows that control is not only about troops, it is about fear. The fear of being cut off, the fear of sanctions, the fear of being alone in the dark. And Madagascar is not alone in these feelings. From Niger to Mali, from Burkina Faso to Chad, the same story unfolds. African nations dare to stand tall, only to find the shadow of France looming above them. But the tide is changing. The Sahel has already broken the 8 chains. And now, from the deep blue of the Indian Ocean, Madagascar rises with the same defiance. The new leaders in Antananarivo have declared a transitional government. They promise no foreign interference. They speak of sovereignty, of justice, of rebuilding. But France is already moving through media, through trade, through pressure from the European Union. They will call this coup illegitimate. They will threaten aid. They will call for sanctions, not because they care for democracy, but because they fear independence. Because of a free Madagascar means a crack in the French system, a signal to the rest of Africa that the empire is not immortal. And so France's hands trembles, not from pity, not from guilt, but from fear. Fear that the African child, the once disciplined, is now standing taller than the master. And in that trembling lies the end of an empire, one island at a time. When the first shot of coup echoed through Antananarivo, the African Union guided in silence. Their statement came quickly, too quickly. We condemn the unconstitutional change of government. The same words repeated for decades, the same silence when the people cry, the same obedience to the unseen powers that found their horse in Addis Ababa. The African Union suspended Madagascar again, as if suspension could heal hunger, as if paperwork could silence pain. But the streets of Africa tell a different story. From Bamako to Niamey, from Ouagadougou to Antananarivo, the youth are cheering, not because they love coups, but because they hate chains. The Sahel has already broken the lane. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, 3 brothers banned by rebellion. They formed their own alliance, pushing France and ECOWAS to the edge of relevance. And now the Red Island looks to the north and sees something powerful: African defiance taking shape. They see soldiers saluting, not Paris, not Washington, but their own people. They see new flags, new unity, and whisper turning into a declaration: Africa must stand on its own feet. But not everyone celebrates. Some African leaders call for order. Some fear that their own policies may soon tremble because they know when one nation rejects foreign masters, others begin to question their own sovereignty. And the silence of some African presidents is not neutrality, it is fear disguised as diplomacy. But the youth are no longer silent. They are speaking in the language of the street, in hashtags, in songs, in marches, in bold words that echo from Dakar to Dar es Salaam. If our leaders won't free us, we will free ourselves. In this silence, something sacred is awakened. A realization that Africa's chains were never physical. They were mental, political, financial. And now, as Madagascar breaks the old pattern, the continent watches. Some pray it falls, others pray it succeeds. But all know this: the old Africa, obedient and quiet, is fading. A new Africa is being born, loud, unafraid, and ready to rewrite the story. The silence of the African Union cannot stop this storm. The condemnation of France cannot stop this awakening, because history has a rhythm, and right now, that rhythm beats for a freedom. The dance has fallen silence, but the silence does not always mean peace. Madagascar wakes to a new morning, a new power. Colonel Michael stands before the nation. His voice deepened, deliberate, control. This is not a coup, he said. This is a correction, a restoration of dignity and justice. His words travel through the air like a prayer. For some, they bring hope. For others, fear. Because every African who has lived long enough knows the word of restoration can either heal or destroy. The new leaders call it a transitional authority. No election yet, no promises of foreign influence. A military-led council. An 18 to 24-month roadmap. They speak of rebuilding, not through aid, but through self-reliance. We will not be dictated to, said Michael. We will walk with our own feet, on our own soil. The people cheer because for the first time in years, their president doesn't sound like a puppet. He sounds like a man. And across the island, new energy fills the air. Farmers talk about land reform. Soldiers speak of national industry. Youth design new flags and slogans, written the word sovereignty in bright red paint across the city. Madagascar is no longer whispering, it's rowling. But in every row hides a question: will this revolution serve the people or serve power itself? Because sovereignty is not a word, it's a responsibility. And freedom without accountability becomes another cage. Kenya's challenges is greater than the coup. He must rebuild trust, he must feed the hungry, he must prove that soldiers can build as well as they fight. And already, the world moves against him. France has frozen aid, the European Union has issued warning, the African Union has suspended Madagascar from its councils. But he stands unshaken. We are not isolated, he says. We are independent. And in that sentence echoes the voice of thousands of Africans' dreams, from Sankara to Lumumba, from Nkrumah to Modibo Keita. The same dream, the same coast. Madagascar is choosing the hard path, the path of self-definition. It may stumble, it may bleed, but no nation has ever been born without pain. And as the red sun rises over the Indian Ocean, one truth becomes clear: this island is no longer a colony of silence, it is a continent reflection. The mirror of Africa is awakening. When nations dare to stand alone, the world does not clap, it calculates. The coup in Madagascar has become more than a national story. It is now a message to Paris, a warning to Washington, and a whisper to Moscow and Beijing. Africa is open for those who come with respect, not chains. The moment the soldiers took power, embassies went silent, Western diplomats vanished into safe rooms, sanctions were drafted overnight. France call it a setback for democracy, but the Strait of Antananarivo call it a new beginning. In Europe, panics hide behind polite words. We urge the swift return to constitutional order, they say, but what they mean is the urge to swift return to control, because this coup threatens not just France's grip, but the very idea that Africa must always ask permission. And yet, while the West condemned, the East listened. Moscow sends quiet signals: we understand your struggle. Beijing releases a short statement: we respect the sovereignty of Madagascar. No threats, no lectures, no condition, just silence, the kind that offers partnership instead of punishment. The world is realigning, and Africa is no longer at the bottom of the table. Africa is the table. The Sahel states, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, have already walked this path. They formed the alliance of Sahel states, and now they watch Madagascar and they nod in recognition, because they too were called rebels until they became rulers. They too were sanctions until they found new partners. The same rhythm that rose in the desert now hums through the sea breeze of the Red Island. Africa is not dividing, Africa is realigning. In this moment, Madagascar stands at the edge of a global chessboard. France wants it back, Russia wants its friendship, China wants its mineral, the West wants its obedience. But Madagascar wants something far more dangerous. It wants freedom. Because freedom can't be bought, borrowed, or broken. Freedom is forged in pain, in hunger, in courage. The Kenya's government has reached out to new allies, African, Asian, and Middle Eastern. Slowly, the world map begins to bend. The Red Island may soon become a bridge between Africa's independence and a new global order. France still watches, but the spell of fear is breaking. The empire's shadow grows longer, but its power fades with the sand, because no amount of sanctions can stop a people who have decided to stand. No amount of diplomacy can bury an awakening. And tonight, in the heart of the Indian Ocean, the world witnesses something real. A nation rewriting its place in history with its own blood, its own voice, and its own will. The night has been long. The street still smells of smoke and salt. Soldiers stand where politicians once smiled. The people whispered, not with fear anymore, but with something new hope. The coup in Madagascar was not just a seizure of power, it was a seizure of dignity. After decades of broken promises, after years of dancing to foreign drums, a nation has finally said enough. But revolutions are not fairy tales. They are mirrors showing us what we are willing to sacrifice to be free. Now, because when the dust settles, the hardest war begins. The war against corruption, betrayal, and greed within. Now, the world watches Madagascar, not as a colony, not as a tourist island, but as a symbol. France's grip is weakening, but its networks still move in the shadows. Contracts, cooperations, and currencies, invisible chains that still binds African hands. And yet, for the first time in decades, there is a fear in Paris, not of echoes, but of clarity. Because the more African wakes, the weaker the empire becomes. What began in the Sahel now echoes through the Indian Ocean. The drums of Mali's, Burkina Faso, and Niger now beat in Madagascar's heart. A continent once divided by colonial borders is slowly uniting under one truth: freedom is not given, it is taken. The coup in Madagascar is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of a reckoning. If the new leaders betray the people, the same streets that lifted them up will put them down. If they serve the people, the island will rise, not as a puppet, but as a beacon. The Red Island stands between two wars, the old and the new, the colonized and the sovereign. And as the sun rises over the Indian Ocean, one truth shines with ease. Africa is no longer waiting for freedom. Africa is walking towards it. From the deserts of the Sahel to the forests of Congo, from the highlands of Ethiopia to the shores of Madagascar, the message is one and the same. The age of submission is dying. The age of sovereignty has begun, and the blood that once flowed for empire will now be the ink that writes Africa's new chapter. Guys, that is the story of the coup in Madagascar. Whatever you think, drop your opinion in the comment section, and thank you for watching this channel.